The case is, the fact that it was a mystery and hidden was kind of a red flag to me. I thought, why?
Meghan Markle, meet the truth. Truth, meet Meghan Markle. I don't think you know each other. In fact, I fear that you're complete strangers.
Meet the story Meghan Markle wants you to believe. Now meet the version her critics say was carefully edited.
An honor, you'd feel safe, and absolutely, yes, you'd be flaunting that stomach everywhere. Like, here, look, put your hands on it, touch it. Just look, the baby moved. Look, oh my God, I need an ultrasound. Oh my God.
According to skeptics, these two versions have never spoken to each other. And that silence is where the controversy begins.
Dignified silence, despite the fact that Meghan treated him so appallingly, even sending back their engagement.
From the outside, Meghan's rise looks cinematic. California upbringing, television actress, sudden romance, and a royal wedding watched by millions. But critics argue that behind the polished smiles and scripted interviews sits a narrative built not on transparency, but on control. Those who question her story say the warning signs appeared early. They claim Meghan learned quickly that perception is power.
That Meghan's relationship with him in his rearview mirror and just doesn't really care.
And that the best way to survive public scrutiny is to shape the story before anyone else can. Admirers call it self-preservation. Detractors call it manipulation. Either way, they argue authenticity was never the goal. Winning was. Critics often point to her family relationships as the first cracks.
In the line of succession, I don't really like the surrogacy conspiracies and those sorts of things. I think there's just sort of an explanation of Meghan just likes to play games with the media, wants to come out on top.
They claim Meghan presented herself as self-made and isolated, while sidelining relatives who might complicate the image. In this framing, her father was not simply unreliable, but inconvenient. His presence threatened the narrative of independence she wanted the world to see. According to this interpretation, excluding him was an emotional fallout.
I speculate on what she allegedly told people or what Trevor allegedly told people, but I think at the time, because Meghan had just gotten this.
It was strategic editing. From there. Skeptics say the pattern only intensified. They argue Meghan's public life became a series of carefully managed scenes, each reinforcing the role she wanted to play at that moment. Actress, activist, victim, survivor, Duchess, every phase. Critics claim arrived fully packaged.
In utero and being born, I heard stories that royal staffers were not allowed to see or touch her abdomen.
While uncomfortable details quietly disappeared from view. This is where rumors enter the conversation. Not facts, not proven history, but persistent whispers repeated across commentary channels and gossip circles. A short, unexplained period in her early adulthood.
The idea that a royal physician was not allowed to examine her womb.
A supposed relationship kept off the record. A chapter of life that, according to critics, does not align with the official biography. On its own, a gap means nothing. But skeptics argue that too many gaps form a pattern. In this critical framing. Meghan is not a woman escaping hardship, but someone rewriting it.
And that Trevor is, and reportedly, Trevor said that she couldn't give him children. And this is according to my brother. I didn't get this from Trevor.
Critics say hardship became a tool, deployed when useful, discarded when inconvenient. When praise flowed, she embraced visibility. When questions followed, she invoked persecution. This, they argue, is how she maintained control, by positioning herself as untouchable without appearing powerful. Supporters see resilience.
Is that going to change? Do you think there'll ever be a moment when Trevor is prompted to speak out?
I mean,
critics see calculation. They claim Meghan understood something fundamental about modern fame. Emotion beats evidence. If you command sympathy, details stop mattering. If you define yourself as the wounded party, anyone who questions you becomes the villain.
Who end up suffering the most, I think, are her own children in that effort. So I think in that respect, that hasn't played well for her overall, but I think Trevor will keep his silence. I think
in this narrative, Meghan didn't just tell her story. She weaponized it. And so the opening act closes not with proof, but with suspicion. Not with documents, but with doubt. According to her critics, Meghan Markle's greatest talent was never acting on screen, but performing an identity so convincingly that the world stopped asking what came before. Critics say the real controversy begins where Meghan's official timeline goes quiet. There is a stretch of early adulthood that appears unusually smooth. almost too clean, especially for someone whose life has otherwise been so publicly dissected. Supporters see nothing unusual. Skeptics see a deliberate erasure.
Why? Something's wrong here.
I mean, Brittany, it seems to me that the only person who can really clear this up outside of Meghan herself is Trevor Engelson, who until this point...
And it is within that silence, they argue, that the most damaging questions take root. According to this critical narrative, Meghan's biography reads less like a record and more like a highlight reel. Certain years are filled with vivid detail, while others are summarized vaguely or skipped altogether. Detractors argue this was not accidental.
The wedding was already, being planned by the time they were trying to arrange, let's say, a meeting right before the wedding. I think Meghan definitely did not want her father there to mess up the narrative that she...
They claim those missing details represent moments that did not fit the character she was building for future success. In their view, Meghan understood early that reinvention requires sacrifice, and sometimes that sacrifice is truth. The rumors that swirl around this period are presented not as proof, but as unresolved contradictions.
I think he has put Meghan behind him. I think he probably is not interested in people bringing up this past relationship as he's clearly moved on. I believe he has 3 children now with his new wife. But when it...
Commentators point to stories of relationships that never made it into the official record. Experiences that were allegedly sealed away rather than explained. They argue that secrecy itself becomes suspicious when transparency is the brand being sold. If nothing was wrong, critics ask, why work so hard to keep questions unanswered?
Prompted by something where he really feels like at this point he needs to say something, but I think he's put this relationship...
This is where the tone of the criticism hardens. Meghan, they say, did not merely move on from her past. She replaced it. According to this framing, she refined her image with precision.
And she finally had her big break. I don't think motherhood was probably something really on her mind at the time. And when it comes to royal...
Selecting which struggles made her sympathetic and which realities made her vulnerable. Struggle was acceptable when it earned admiration. Accountability was not. Detractors also highlight how quickly her public identity shifted once greater opportunities appeared. Each reinvention came with a new moral framing.
But he has his dignity, he has a lovely family, he has a wife who seems to love him for who he is, and he's still working in the industry, and I think, oh my goodness,
When ambition was questioned, it became empowerment. When privilege was challenged, it became... In this telling, Meghan did not deny contradictions. She overwhelmed them with emotion until scrutiny felt inappropriate. Those who distrust her narrative often focus on how aggressively dissent was dismissed. Critics, journalists, even neutral observers were labeled cruel, biased, or malicious.
Devastated at the time with the way that he was treated, but actually he dodged a bullet.
This, skeptics argue, created a protective barrier. Once questioning her story became socially risky, the story no longer needed to be airtight. It only needed to feel righteous. The deeper accusation is not about any single rumor, but about intent.
To go there, when it came to the surrogacy rumors in this interview, watch.
She also clutched.
Critics claim Meghan's guiding principle was always control. Control of perception, control of access, control of sympathy. They argue that every relationship, every interview, and every revelation was filtered through one question. Does this serve the narrative?
All times, which of course have ensured that nobody could touch her stomach or feel.
In this framing, Meghan is not misunderstood. She is precisely understood. And that is what unsettles her critics most. They believe she knows exactly what she is doing, and that the gaps, silences, and denials are not weaknesses.
She fires her publicity team. 6 battle-weary minions who, in Meghan's mind, failed to convince the world of the wonderfulness of their stunning... Definitely weeks that the story about these two going forward will be financial.
Well, it's really true, and what's very interesting...
Critics say the pattern is clear. Meghan Markle, in their view, is not hiding from the truth. She is managing it, editing it, reshaping it, and if that is correct, then the most dangerous part of her story is not what has been said, but what has never been allowed to surface. If the earlier chapters raise suspicion, This is where critics say the consequences become impossible to ignore. In their framing, the issue is no longer about missing details or selective storytelling, but about what those omissions protect.
Definitely infer her mom was completely willing to go along with the narrative, and that's why she was there.
Yeah, very good point.
Because once a public figure builds an identity on moral authority, any hidden contradiction becomes more than personal. It becomes explosive. Skeptics argue that Meghan's power was never rooted in rank or title, but in narrative leverage.
All that horrible stuff those pesky reporters wrote about her was purely the fault.
By positioning herself as a symbol of progress, empathy, and truth, she gained insulation from scrutiny. Questioning her story no longer looked like curiosity. It looked like cruelty. And critics say that was the point. When the audience is trained to react emotionally, facts lose their grip. This is why, according to detractors, people who once knew her quietly disappeared from her public life.
A child herself, watch this.
Yeah.
I ask you, do you believe it's true?
I do believe now.
I mean, in the same interview, she goes, "I didn't really get any opportunities as a mixed race actress, blah, blah, blah." And then,
no one knew she was mixed race, did they?
20 minutes later.
Former friends, family members, associates who belonged to an earlier version of her story. Not villains, not heroes, just inconvenient witnesses to a past that no longer fit the brand. Critics argue that distance was not accidental, but preventative. The fewer voices connected to the old timeline, the easier it became to present a new one without challenge.
Behind the hands that were shielding the belly. So if anybody had made a move to touch the belly, they would never have reached it.
What unsettles critics most is not any single allegation, but the consistency of the method. They argue that whenever pressure increased, the response followed a familiar pattern. Deny specifics, elevate emotion, shift focus, reframe criticism as harm. In this way, accountability was never confronted directly. It was redirected to critics. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.